a program of Zen Life and Meditation Center Chicago. And we're so happy that you all could join us this morning. And I hope that you folks all appreciate programs like Sunday Morning Zen and commit to sit, because it's your generosity that makes these programs possible. And we thank you so much for it. We have a lot of gratitude for that. And if you're thinking about it, while it's on top of your mind, we'd appreciate it if you'd reach out and give from the bottom of your heart. So zlmc.org/donate ensures that we can continue to bring you these high quality programs like we have in the past because of your generosity. So we really appreciate it. I'm very excited this morning about this morning's speaker, Soprano Christine Steyer. And she's been a recipient of national awards such as the 2020 Honored Artist of the American Prize for outstanding contributions to the arts. She also received acclaim for her portrayals and has sung in over 40 productions at Lyric Opera of Chicago. She's recently expanded her role in music as a music advocate as well, bringing classical music to 23,000 youth in underserved areas. As a librettist, she and composer David Shenton have been creating Bellissima Opera's Tales of Transcendence. It's a series of new operas exploring our shared humanity. And the first of those, On Call, COVID-19, honoring healthcare workers, premiered in April of 2021, and that's the subject of this morning's talk. And you can watch the full opera by clicking on the link in your week at ZLMC. But she's here this morning to play an excerpt and to talk about that opera as well. So thank you so much for being here, Christine, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me today. I just wanted to say that there's a little correction to the link that was sent for those of you who may want to watch the full opera, and I've put the correct link in the chat. And I'm just going to read it for those of you that may not be able to see the chat. It's workinginconcert.org/COVID opera. Instead of the period in the newsletter, it's a slash, workinginconcert.org/COVID opera. And that will be able to be viewing that if you'd like for free until February 28th. So again, thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen for today, and I think I'm going to do everything right, but if something turns out that it's a disaster, bear with me. So first, what I would just like to do is I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna share. Hopefully, not too much of my messy desktop shows up, and so. In case for some of you that do not know what a librettist is, a libretto is basically a playwright, but it's an operatic term. And so it's a playwright who writes specifically for the genre of opera. So there's some little differences. I'm going to start out by presenting a 20-minute video that we made for an organization that wanted to, a health worker organization that wanted to know more about our process in creating this work. I will share that video with you. It'll put you behind the scenes, and there's some guest artists that were involved in creating this work. And then I will come back on and talk a little bit more about it. And if any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask me those. So here is the video, and I'm going to make this full screen and hit play. If there's any problems with the sound, please let me know. Thank you. The opera On Call COVID-19 depicts the early stages of the pandemic when the world was stunned by the severity of the virus and the speed by which it spread, a time before proven vaccines or treatments were available. In March 2020, composer David Shenton and I were preparing the premiere of Bellissima's first opera in its Tales of Transcendence, a new series of operas honoring those transcending the human divide. Just then, the pandemic hit in the US and put an indefinite stop to all live performances. In keeping with the theme of transcendence, Bellissima Opera quickly decided to create a new opera about the global frontline healthcare workers we were seeing on the news every day. Inspired by 200 news articles about these modern day heroes, our opera On Call COVID-19 was born and premiered as a virtual work in April 2021.
On Call tells the story of 6 global healthcare workers who support each other in a series of Zoom calls during the pandemic from the first days until New Year's Eve 2020. Working remotely, the creators, cast, and technical team for On Call participated from 5 different states and were joined by an international choir. Our opera's central character, a Southside Chicago nurse, was sung by Gwendolyn Brown.
When an opera involving Christine, David, and I was put on hold due to the pandemic, the two asked me if I would be willing to play a Southside Chicago healthcare worker serving on the front lines of the pandemic in a new opera they plan to create. Additionally, to personalize our characters and to honor a healthcare worker or someone who died from COVID-19, each cast member was asked to choose the name of their own character. To respect the privacy of individuals, we were asked to only use someone's first or last names, and from there create the composite names. The name I chose was Sandra Jasmine Walker. Sandra is the name of my first cousin who died from COVID very early in the pandemic. Jasmine Walker is a name that I obtained from a newspaper article of many who died at the early stages of the pandemic. I chose the name of an African-American woman, and thus the name I chose and put together is Sandra Jasmine Walker.
The opera's first scene takes place in early April 2020. At the request of the Chicago healthcare worker, she and 5 of her global medical friends gather for their first Zoom call. She expresses her frustrations over recent events at her hospital, including the lack of essential supplies and the cutting of nursing salaries. She questions if she will be able to return to work the next day. The New York healthcare worker, an ambulance driver, admits he may have been inadvertently responsible for the death of his grandmother who contracted COVID.
Maybe it was me. No one said anything at the funeral. That maybe it was me. Maybe it was me who gave it to Grandma. Maybe one night after that we shared. So tired. Maybe. And we were just saying how lucky
In the region of Lombardy in northern Italy, the Italian healthcare worker sings to the group and to those listening outside his balcony. His song is about the resiliency of the Italian people to overcome this plague. Inspired by the Italian healthcare worker's song, the South Korean healthcare worker translates it into English, making a few changes to reflect the situation of her people in Seoul. What an awful night was it raining, our mountains of snow. Is it vain, oh gracious Lord? Oh, dogs, keep off my soul.
It was a great honor for me to be invited to direct the world premiere of On Call COVID-19 with Bellissima Opera, and especially since the work was just being created when I came into the production. Then later on, when one of the original singers became ill, I was asked to step into the role of the Lebanon healthcare worker. This was very daunting to learn the role very quickly, but the music is so beautiful and the text so meaningful that it was a great joy.
The six gathered for their second Zoom call in early September 2020. The Lebanon healthcare worker who works with Syrian refugees explains how their plight was made worse by the virus and the subsequent Beirut explosion. He questions how effective he can be as a doctor when the basic needs of the refugees, like clean water, cannot be met.
Along with global recession causing cuts, alive it did, igniting drama for the sick who believed it was safer to hide in their tents with their families than to be tested and moved into isolation centers. COVID is just another thing, a man said to me. It's like everything else we have been through. It spells one word. Death. Another step back.
In addition to writing the libretto for this opera, I also sang the role of the final healthcare worker from Brazil. In this scene, the Rio de Janeiro healthcare worker articulates how the illegal mining and deforestation in the Amazon correlates with the spread of COVID among vulnerable indigenous communities. Special suits. Time is in real fortunes. In the streets. Trees are just days before that abundant life. Will they be Everyone except the Chicago healthcare worker criticized those they each believe responsible for the magnitude of the pandemic. The Chicago healthcare worker interrupts them to remind them that these calls should not be an echo chamber of the news, but rather a safe place to share their personal struggles during this challenging time.
Between those children, and those who cannot, his father stretched apart. Children watching streams, children seeing past public spaces, children seeing past public spaces. Will they inherit what heaven will burn? Social networks propagate the friendship of a particle of dust has brought the planet to its knees. A viral form expression of a global particle of dust has brought the planet to its knees. How did we come to this? 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 Meeting began as a spaceman.
In addition to being involved in the Bellissima Opera premiere, I was also the director for the collegiate premiere that took place 2 weeks later at Western Michigan University, where I'm the director of opera. I'm very happy to announce that the WMU production of On Call won the National Opera Association Award for Best 2021 Collegiate Opera Production in its division. We thought it would be nice for you to hear an excerpt of those young singers who were so touched to be a part of this groundbreaking work.
The six gather for their final Zoom call on New Year's Eve 2020. It is the 1-year anniversary of the Chinese announcing the novel coronavirus to the world. They observe that as healers, kindness and compassion are as precious a tool as a vaccine and a ventilator, and that the lifeline they provided each other during these unprecedented times will now extend itself into the larger world.
We are healers, and we must remember that medicine not only is a science, it is an art. We are healers, and we must remember that kindness and compassion are as precious as vaccine and ventilator. Let us see our snapshot, a snapshot of this moment, that in three encounters we see. They provide each other lifeline. Our lifeline is standing inside. Into the light.
The opera's postlude, In Memoriam, is a tribute to all the healthcare workers who died from COVID. It was sung by a virtual choir of 59 singers from around the world.
We do hope that this video has inspired you to watch the entire 60-minute opera. And please know that it will be streaming until January 31st, 2022. So please spread the word to your colleagues and friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder that we have extended that viewing for an extra month until the end of February. I just want to take a moment to thank all the people that were involved in putting that opera together. We had literally no budget, and and what we thought was going to be a little 20-minute opera turned into an hour opera, and there was a lot of I barely got through it. It was kind of like writing a term paper, staying up to write a term paper, but instead of a one-nighter, it was like a 9-monther. But everybody was so amazing. It was a real group effort. Thank you for watching that. I am open to talking about the opera. I can just say a few words about it now, and then if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. A few things I'd like to say is that, as I mentioned, I've been creating with my little company, Bellissima Opera. It was really important for us to start creating new operas. I love opera and I love traditional opera. And part of the challenge with opera is it's a little bit of a dinosaur, that it tends to always sort of have this romantic works that it does over and over again, when we love them, but it hasn't really kind of put its foot into the modern era like other art forms. And with the popularity of that and musicals, the genres had a little bit of a decline. So what I wanted to do was sort of create new works with my talented team of people that I work with that I think are like-minded, and to try to create works that have meaning for audiences, and then they connect with them in a more intimate level, breaking that fourth wall and having more of operas that are created through community. And so much of what I'm doing is really modeled on, my time at the Zen Center and my other spiritual home, which is Unity Temple, and to see how we can create community through our actions and our intentions. The first opera, as I mentioned early in the video, Future Perfect, was an opera that was being co-created with 1,300 youth. And we started that in 2015. And June has known about that project for a while. In fact, she is helping me build the dragon for that opera. She's cutting her dragon scales. I believe you're up to about 400 now or something like that. And then that was put on hold. And so it not only left a gap for us with that opera being postponed indefinitely, but it was just really depressing for everybody in the arts, because, you could not have had a worse profession than singing opera. We project our voices, there's aerosols. The music industry really collapsed at that point. And so it was important for us to be doing something from a creative standpoint and to sing. I think if I hadn't physically sung, it wasn't my best singing I'd ever done, because I wasn't singing for that whole year. I had no opportunity to sing. But I think all of us felt that if we hadn't had a reason to keep practicing every day and to do something, it would have really affected us. And also, the University of Western Michigan department was also going to actually close the department down permanently, I believe, during because of this situation. And Carl, the director, when he proposed to present this opera, that it could be done safely with the students, they decided to keep that opera program open. And then it was a really wonderful way for these students to be involved. And again, I think had they not had that, I think it would have been really hard for them. And so it was an important part of just our health to be a part of this project for the year. The other part I want to say is that the stories, the libretto was, and I really devote it, when I say I really devote it to the journalists. I based everything in the opera on things that I had read. So nothing was really invented. It was put together from different stories and arranged so it made sense from like a theatrical standpoint. And again, honoring people's stories. I never took one story, but I would put together composite characters of stories, because I never wanted somebody watching this to feel like somehow their story got plagiarized. So I tried to grab from as many sources as I could. For the Chicago character, it was rather easy because there was so much living in Chicago on the news every day. I have to give a shout out to Christiane Amanpour and company. If any of you watch that company, her program, she had Ed Young from the Atlantic, who is probably, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant voices, as an articulate man, also a scientist, a great understanding of science. The Atlantic magazine also posted free articles about COVID throughout the pandemic. And Christian also interviewed a man, and I'm forgetting his complete name, Sebastian, and I'm kind of losing the last name, but he was a Brazilian photographer doing a lot of work about the deforestation in the Amazon. And the Italian song that the Italian singer sang was a poem that I had a friend of mine write, who's an Italian poet. And I wanted to have a little bit of local flair there because of what was going on in Italy, where, you know, they were singing on the balconies at night. And then as far as the research for the Lebanon character goes, that was tricky to find stuff, but I did end up finding a Facebook page that was devoted to people that were going around in a mobile clinic doing this work, where they were traveling through Lebanon into the Syrian camps and doing this work. So I was, you know, it's always the expression, truth is stranger than fiction. You just don't need to make any of this stuff up. I mean, these heroes are among us. And not only the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare workers that were doing all this stuff and the volunteers, but also, you know, the journalists who were in some cases putting themselves in quite difficult positions to report on these stories. So I want to thank everyone involved. And I will take questions if anybody has anything they would like to ask at this point. Yes, June has a question. June, I don't think I have the ability to unmute you. Oh, great.
It's not really a question, just a comment about that beautiful jump that you have brought your opera into relevancy and modernity, I guess you would call it, and such an important subject about COVID that has been affecting all of us, and what you say about, you know, having a project, a goal to work for those youth there. It was just absolutely beautiful. Just the message of humanity and trying to do something, and just absolutely bravo, bravo.
Thank you. I have to give a shout out to one of the students in the cast, the WMU. A few things about that. You may have noticed that they had different names than the other cast. It's because they, of course, did the same thing where they wanted to honor someone that meant something for them. We also had a gender reversal. The Lebanon character was played by a mezzo soprano, so a female voice. And that person actually could not get back to school. They were in Ecuador and they could not get back. I believe it was Ecuador. They could not get back. So they had to completely do everything from, I think it was like an internet cafe in Ecuador, which makes it all the more amazing that that happened. And it kind of, I think, helped that character because they really were, there was some turmoil going on wherever they were. And in politically, I believe. And so it made it all the more relevant for them to sort of be playing a character like that in a situation like that. Yes, Roberts.
I also want to, I was so moving, Christine. I always associate opera with romantic tragedies. And so the fact that you're bringing opera into a new, more modern context is very moving, and that you did it under such trying conditions. Really, it didn't. It didn't occur to me that opera would be a very hard thing to practice during the pandemic, but obviously it would be. And look what you did. I have a question about the story from Brazil. I wonder, maybe that's more in the full opera, but is the story actually saying that the amount of coffins were so great that it was having an impact on the Amazon forest? Usually the story about the Amazon is they're clearing rainforest for pastures or for farming or whatever, but the impression I had from your opera was there were so many people dying that it actually had an impact on, because they had to make so many coffins. Is that actually?
Yeah, I can clarify that a little bit. It was taken a little out of context, but the thinking with that was that once COVID hit and Bolsonaro was in power, the people were able to get in because the regulators stopped doing their jobs, turned a blind eye to it. And so people that were not supposed to go in and deforest were not being regulated, and the deforestation rate became accelerated. So we call the Amazon, it's called, I guess, the lungs of the world. And so when I was, I had, 3 pages of this aria and I had to get it down to like 20 lines. And so I'm trying to figure out what's the story here. We've got the people are going in, but not only are they doing deforestation, destroying the lungs of the planet, but they are now entering space that they're not supposed to enter because the indigenous have no immunities to the coronaviruses. So then they're also doubly infecting them. And since there's no immunity, and this is, pre-vaccine, they're dying at alarming rates, and they don't have medical infrastructure. A lot of them are, not easy to get access to. And then you're not supposed to have contact with them to the extent that we would with each other at that point because of the low immuno protections. And so when you'll learn earlier in the aria, if you watch the whole opera, that there are these images, if you look at them from above, of their aerial views of the coffins that were laid out in the clearings. And at first you don't know what they are. They're actually quite beautiful photographs. You don't realize what they are. And then all of a sudden you look at them closer as it comes in and you realize they're coffins. And what you think are people are flowers draped on some kind of rectangular shape. You realize they're the people in the hazmat suits.
Oh my
and so
God.
it's a when I was trying to find what's the story in there, and what I kept coming to was the connection between the lungs of the world and the lungs of the people that we're killing it on both levels. We're killing the lungs of the world, and we're giving all of the indigenous a disease that is killing them by infecting their lungs. And I found that was an incredibly strong parallel once I could see through it. I thought that was the story I wanted to tell.
Wow, that's amazing. That is just, and the thing about Lebanon also was very moving to me. I think that sometimes we live in our bubble in America, and we don't hear about stories about other sufferings in the world, or how people were dealing with the pandemic, and to think of how people dealt with the pandemic in the third world, where they don't have the resources, and we have all the luxuries of having all the resources and all the vaccines, and we still won't take them. I mean, we are so entitled as a country. They're so moving, Christine. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see the whole opera. Really
I wanted to say a few other things about the process. And our course, somebody found out that teaches a course at Vanderbilt, a university, found out about our class, and they added it to the syllabus on pandemics and music throughout history. And we made one of the 6 topics. I guess there were 6 other works created during pandemics. And so I gave a talk the other day to the students there, and they were interested in the process. And I wanted to speak about that. When we decided to do this opera, it was so the pandemic really hit in March, right, of 2020. We knew Future Perfect was canceled basically in April. In May, I got this idea. And so the first scene took place in I believe it was April. So I quickly, the first scene came very quickly. There was the story of the Chicago healthcare worker. There was a lot going on the ground in Chicago. The New York healthcare worker, it was pretty easy to get information about that. So that first scene was written, I think, in June, basically. And so we got the music to the professional cast right away to see how it fit in their voices. And we had a loose structure. We didn't write the recitatives. The recitatives are the stuff in between the big musical numbers, because I figured I wanted a little leeway to tie things together. But we wanted to get the arias. The arias are your solo number. We wanted to get those to the singers right away so they could start on that. I had really no idea what was going to happen next. We had written scene 1, and I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen with this opera. All I know is we're premiering it a year, in April 2021, we're premiering it. And then the university is going to do it, and they need to know the date they're going to premiere it to put there on their calendar. So all I knew is we got to have a show. And then as scene 2 started unfolding, which took place in September, I started getting that story in June or July, and again watching what was unfolding on the ground, and seeing where the story went. I knew that I knew I wanted to have a Middle Eastern character at the very beginning, and I knew, or at least somebody in that region, and I knew that Brazil was going to be a hot spot because that had already started taking shape. I also wanted to, of course, Italy, I kind of knew the geographical areas that I think were going to be important to this story. And so then, of course, we have that Beirut explosion in July, which hadn't happened in the first, when we wrote the first scene, and that was a story twist. And as things were continuing to unfold, and then the last scene took place on New Year's Eve. So then we got everybody's scene 2, all the music for scene 2, except that crazy quintet, the one where we're all at the same time. That was the hardest piece of music I think that's ever been written. David is brilliant to try to make sense of that text that I gave him. And then I had it all mapped out for what I wanted scene 3 to be, which I knew the opera needed to end. We needed to put closure on this. But I couldn't really write it because I just didn't know if something was going to happen on July 31st. So it was all ready to go. I had it basically written, and I waited for the ball to drop on the 31st. And then I said, okay, I think nothing weird has happened in the world that wasn't expected. And then we finished up that final scene. It was hard. And let me tell you the crazy process about how we did this. We didn't have hardly any budget. So we relied on people to use the equipment they had. So if you had a cell phone, a lot of people recorded their voice on the cell phone. So the process was this: David sent them, each of the singers, the music, and there was a little bit of a period of time for feedback to be worked out. Then he recorded the piano part. and then they had an earpiece and they recorded their aria into a phone or a recording device. They sent it back to him. And then once everybody from scene 1 submitted their recordings to him and he cleaned them up and matched them up with the piano better, then he sent it back to the 6 of us. And then I sent them the backdrops for what I thought their backdrop should look like for the state of mind and the geographical location. And then they lip synced on Zoom, recording themselves on Zoom. And then they sent that lip syncing to the video guy, who then assembled it all to look like a live call and then put on the subtitles. And then 2 weeks behind that was the student production, we were also managing that project. And it was insane, I have to say.
That really was amazing.
Yeah. And so, I think we all realized that we had we known what we got ourselves into. So yes, Susan.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, Susan.
One of the aspects of brilliance of this piece is that you worked globally. I mean, there's so many great singers in Chicago. You could have done this in Chicago, but by reaching out across the planet, I mean, that's such, a remarkable reminder that this is a planet experience. So is your opera. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to, there were a couple things that I felt like I needed to happen. I wanted the opera to end on a positive note. And I felt that was very important. Again, I sort of had to wait to see what happened on that New Year's Eve. I also knew that this story of the COVID was not going to end when the opera ended, and that it was going to be a long story to continue. And in fact, what was, of course, it hit India, and having spent a little time there and knowing the situation there with the population and the warm weather and the difficulties of social distancing and water and all that, we knew that was going to really be powerful there. But at some point, the story needed to end. It just needed to end for logistical reasons as well. But it didn't need to end in a way that it said the crisis is over. I think what I wanted to do was to create a safe space for 6 people who might be going through something that can find that place and say at the end of it, and thank you to the pragmatism of Roshi and June, who I love and have gifted me so much wisdom, that you can only do sometimes what you can do. And there's a practical side of, if you're doing something intentionally, there's a practical limit, right? And so I wanted to create a work that it needed to end, but it needed to end in a positive note. And that's why I use the word a snapshot of this moment, because it simply was. It was a slice of something that happened over a 9-month period, and it started and it ended, and it wasn't going to be more than that. And it wasn't going to try to solve problems beyond that. If I was to say one thing I really wanted to create, and this comes from my own experience of sort of the intentional group of community that you can find, if for those of you that have ever found yourself in a self-help group, or sometimes at the Zen Center, we've created safe spaces with the talking stick, which I love so much. Such a brilliant idea, really, to be able to have that place to speak without interruption, to be honored for what you say things that you may not be able to say for whatever reasons to anyone else. And what I wanted to do was to create this premise that this woman is friends with these other people, and she has reached out to friends that she's known, because she's in a very bad place. The only people that will understand her, because they're dealing with it as well. And to then what it turns into is a series of monologues or arias, in a way, where each of them has an opportunity to share what's going on in their part of the world, things that they cannot share with anybody else. And so community. Yes.
Christine, I understand the artistically the difficulty of ending the opera, because I mean, you have to realistically. I understand in terms of logistics, you can't do it for. But I think part of the nature of the rolling trauma that we are experiencing in the pandemic is that we don't know what the end is, and I think that's part of the pain that we're experiencing, is that we don't have a sense of a future we could move into, and I think that is creating an enormous amount of angst and anxiety. So I kind of understand that you did a snapshot, because there's having a happy ending to this that's kind of, I don't know, how do you have
It would trivialize it, I think.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's like how do you have a happy ending to Auschwitz?
Yeah.
So
I wanted to provide just an idea that sometimes in the midst of tragedy, there are ways to come together to be in community around it.
Yeah, so can I just say one thing? Because you mentioned counsel, and I think that's the other thing that we're missing in a way, is we're missing the sense of safety that comes from being able to see each other face to face, hug each other. And I think I just wanted to say we've been missing counsel for the last 2 years at the Zen Center. We haven't been able to figure out how to do it. We've tried doing it hybrid and it doesn't work. So I'm going to start doing a regular, maybe once a month counsel online for those of you that want to join. And my intention is to create a safe space where we can share. And it's lovely the way you did that in the opera too, that the healthcare workers were supporting each other through Zoom.
Thank you. If that's it, I'm grateful for sharing the morning with all of you. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank June and Robert for the idea to do this, and Michael for helping. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Christine.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Christine. That was lovely.
Thank
Just beautiful.
you.